Prepare yourself. Today's case is a difficult one. It's the story of Navin Jones, an 8-year-old boy who was stolen from the one person who loved him most and was then tortured, starved, and ultimately murdered. Navin should have been protected. He could have been protected. But due to the many failures of those who could have stepped in, Navin is no longer here. And once he met his tragic end, even more information came out that suggests this family is even more twisted than originally thought. Navin may not have been their first victim. With that being said, let's get into the case. Navin Jones was born to Stephanie Jones and Brandon Walker on December 7, 2013 in Peoria, Illinois. When Navin was born, it was found very quickly that he had opioids in his system, so he and his older brother were taken away from their parents and placed into DCFS custody. From there, they were placed into the care of their grandmother, Laura Walker, who then became their legal guardian. For the 8 years that followed, Navin and his older brother lived with Laura in their home in Washington, Illinois, though I want to note that the boys did get to see their parents from time to time. They were allowed visitation until 2017 when DCFS received another report that Stephanie had spanked Navin so hard that it left extensive bruising. From that time, as far as I could see, Navin hadn't really seen either of his parents. Navin was described by those who loved him as a sweet, loving boy with the most adorable smile. He was so full of personality and was always laughing and smiling. He loved to play with his dog and spend time outside riding his bike and scooter. He was a happy boy who was so very loved by his grandmother and big brother. Now, by July of 2021, Laura found herself in the middle of a family emergency. Her own parents, who were living in Florida and were no doubt in their 80s most likely by then, were in need of medical care. So she headed down to Florida to help out. When doing so, she dropped the boys off into the care of their parents, Stephanie and Brandon, back in Peoria. I want to note that this wasn't her first choice. Originally, she was only going to drop off the older brother, but Navin wanted to be with his big brother, so she reluctantly decided to leave him there as well so they could be together. I mean, it would only be a few weeks. Even though Laura knew that the couple weren't the best parents long term, they could handle the boys for a few weeks while she dealt with her own parents' medical needs. She stayed in Florida for about 6 weeks before returning to pick up the boys as planned, just in time for them to return to Washington right before the new school year started. But when she got to the home on August 1st, nobody would come to the door. They were flat out ignoring her. She went around and looked inside the windows of the home, and inside she saw that the home was in a state of disaster. There was trash, clutter, and old food lying all around inside. It was filthy. She felt that it was in no condition for a child to be living. She tried multiple more times over the days that followed to get into contact with Stephanie and Brandon, but again, they continued ignoring her. Because of this, by August 12, 2021, Laura called DCFS to make a report. She said that Stephanie and Brandon were refusing to give the boys back, even though she had legal custody. She reported the poor conditions within the home and mentioned how Stephanie had a history of drug use as well as physical aggression towards Navin and his older brother. After making the report to DCFS, she called the Peoria Police Department in hopes that they could help get the boys out of that house. When they arrived, she showed them her guardianship paperwork and waited as police tried to get Stephanie and Brandon to answer the door. After numerous failed attempts, according to reports, Laura became frustrated after waiting for several hours with police to basically do nothing to help, so she left the scene and returned home to Washington. A few days after returning home, she then went to the Washington Police Department to try again to get the boys back. In this report, she stated that she tried multiple times between August 1st and August 17th to get the boys back, but the parents were being uncooperative. By that point, DCFS agents had also tried to go to the home and get into contact with the parents, but they too were ignored. All DCFS really did at that time was report that they made good faith effort to contact the parents. After making this report to the police, an officer called Brandon Walker, who surprisingly did pick up. He promised that he would return the children to Laura that same evening, but lo and behold, 2 days passed and Brandon did not make good on his promise. When an officer called Brandon again, this time he informed them that he and Stephanie took the children to the Chicago area, which is around 2 hours away from where they lived in Peoria. He said that they would be back in 2 days, at which time he would return the boys. But once again, that day came and went, and the boys did not return back to Laura. When time passed and they still were not returning home, Laura decided to file the children as missing. Once again, Washington police officers called Brandon, who this time said, "No way on expletive earth is she getting the kids back." He then went on to say that Laura mistreated them and that he was now out of state with the boys. For the 7 weeks that followed, DCFS made a few attempts to contact the parents. It wasn't until October 21st when they finally got a hold of Brandon once again. This time, he told the DCFS worker that he was out of state with his children in Florida and had no plans on returning. However, he did say that Navin had a doctor appointment in Peoria the following week, so he'd let the agency see them to confirm their whereabouts. But as you could have guessed, when DCFS reached out to the boys' doctor, they confirmed that neither of them had any appointments scheduled. Not only that, but Navin hadn't been seen by their office since 2019. After this, the Illinois DCFS reached out to the Florida DCFS to see if there are any reports of child neglect or abuse, and found that there hadn't been any, as if the parents were going to report themselves for neglecting or abusing the boys. Either way, by November 3rd, after not hearing from the family and not receiving any further reports of abuse from the Florida DCFS, the Illinois DCFS closed the case, finding the grandmother's concerns unfounded. They did this despite the fact that she had legal custody, and the parents who did not have legal custody were refusing to return the children. From there, 3 more months passed before anything else was heard about the family. By February 14th, DCFS received an anonymous call reporting that the family was back in Illinois and that Navin was being abused by his parents. In that report, it was claimed that Navin was found to have a black eye, he was being locked in the basement as punishment, and that neither of the boys are attending school. The report said that the older brother goes to work with Brandon every day and that he appears dirty. After confirming that the boys were never enrolled in school, DCFS reached out to the family once again. Brandon answered the phone and said that he wasn't harming or neglecting the kids, but confirmed that they weren't enrolled in school because they weren't his legal guardians. He agreed to have an investigator come to his home, setting a time for this appointment. But once again, when the investigator got to the home, no one was there to answer the door. Brandon later said that he forgot about the appointment and rescheduled the visit. Finally, by February 22nd, the investigator actually made contact with the family. The investigator reported that Navin did not have a black eye, as if it couldn't have healed within the week since the report was made, as if Brandon probably didn't reschedule this appointment after realizing that the black eye didn't heal and waited until it was fully gone. However, the report did state that Navin appeared sickly and thin. He looked too small for his age. At the time, he was wearing a baggy hoodie and sweatpants, so they couldn't see the full extent of his appearance, but even wearing those clothing items, he did still look very thin. When asked about why Navin was so small, Brandon said that Navin was eating plenty, but he just wasn't gaining weight. The investigator suggested that he may have a medical condition, but Brandon said that he couldn't take him to the doctor because he didn't have legal custody. Due to this, the agent said that he would help the parents get temporary legal custody. From there, DCFS started to try and work with Laura, Brandon, and Stephanie to get the paperwork arranged for Brandon and Stephanie to have temporary legal custody of Navin and his brother. This began in March of 2022, and as with anything that has to do with the government or DCFS in general, the process took quite a while. By that point, Laura was frustrated with the whole situation. She was done dealing with Brandon and Stephanie and starting to accept that handing over custody is the only thing that would get the situation under control. She was truly scared for Navin's well-being, and the DCFS worker made it seem like the only way Navin would get medical care was if Laura signed over her rights, so she did just that. But before the paperwork could even be processed through DCFS by around 2 p.m. on March 29, 2021, 911 received a call from Stephanie Jones reporting that she just found her son, 8-year-old Navin, unresponsive. She said that she had put Navin to bed the night prior at around 8 p.m. She said that she was eating lunch when she realized that she hadn't seen him since the night prior, so she went to check on him. But upon entering his room, she found that he was unresponsive, so she put him in the shower and sprayed him with cold water to bring him back, but he still would not wake up.
Tell me exactly what happened.
My son, since I got him from his grandmother's after she threw him out, he's been doing a lot of really weird things, like drinking his own urine. He's pooped all over the house, smearing it everywhere. Sometimes he'll eat a whole bunch. Sometimes he doesn't want to eat at all.
Okay. What's he doing today, ma'am?
It's getting late, so I'm sorry.
What's happened today?
I went upstairs because I hadn't heard from him and found him unresponsive on the floor.
Is he breathing?
No.
Okay. I am sending the paramedic.
CPR before I called you guys, and I can't get anything.
Okay. Is there a defibrillator available? If so, send someone to get it now and tell me when you have it.
I don't have one.
Okay, I am sending the paramedics to help you now. Stand the line, and I'll tell you exactly what to do next. How old is your son?
8.
Okay, are you with him right now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to help you. I know you said you've tried CPR, but we're going to go through this, okay? I want you to lay him flat on his back on the ground and remove anything under his head, okay? Tell me when that's done.
I removed his clothes, and he was cold, so I put him in the shower and used the hose. I don't know what to do.
Okay, how long ago did you find him?
Maybe 10 minutes ago.
Okay.
So I think they're here. Someone's knocking on my door.
Is your door unlocked? Okay, go unlock it and come right back immediately.
When first responders arrived, they were immediately concerned with the whole situation. They had been informed of the situation with the family, that Grandma had legal custody. The parents were allowed to watch them for a few weeks, but then refused to return them once Grandma asked for them back. They knew that they had been working with DCFS for weeks and that there was a history of abuse and mistreatment. When first responders made their way through the house, they found Navin in the bathtub, lying unconscious. He was cold to the touch and was not breathing. It was apparent right away that he was extremely thin for his age and was covered in bruises. CPR was started, but it was apparent from the jump that Navin was likely too far gone. Despite this, Navin was loaded into an ambulance to be transported to the hospital for further treatment, but once he arrived, tragically, medical staff confirmed that there was nothing they could do. 8-year-old Navin Jones was already deceased. Back at the house, as all that was happening, investigators continued making their way through the home. They found that most of the home was in decent condition and was well furnished, basically what you'd expect from a family home. But Navin's room told a different story. They found that the door to Navin's room didn't have a doorknob. Instead, it had a rope tied around it to keep the door shut, preventing Navin from leaving his room. Inside, they found only a urine-stained bed with a pillow on it. There were no sheets or blankets on the bed or anywhere in the room. There was one toy found in the room. The closet in the room was padlocked, and inside there were feces and blood all over the floors and walls. Then they found a note on the outside of the door that read, "Don't give Navin any food or drink. Do not let him out of the room. He has what he needs until I wake up." In later interviews, Stephanie confirmed that she was the one who wrote that note. After investigators made their way through that home and realized that Navin was beyond saving, they broke the news to Stephanie. She responded by sitting on the stairs outside the home with her cigarette and started crying into her hands. At that time, Brandon was standing in the yard and Stephanie yelled to him that Navin was gone. He responded by yelling, running over to his car and slamming his hands on the hood, yelling that there was just no way. Stephanie continued talking, saying that she told him and that, quote, DCFS bitch that he needed to be seen and that his behaviors were not normal. They both acted like grieving parents who just lost a child, parents who wanted to take their poor child to the doctor but weren't able to. Within minutes, though, they both seemed to have calmed down enough to just sit there and smoke their cigarettes.
Ma'am, I'm sorry to have to tell you, but through all our efforts, there's nothing that we can do further.
Oh my God.
Do
you guys have time?
Just call him now.
The cop just told me.
What the do you mean?
They cannot resuscitate him. That's what the I mean.
There's no f***ing way! There's no f***ing way!
I've been telling you and the DCFS bitch that he needed to be seen.
You guys are putting all your business out in front of everybody like that.
That his behavior was not normal.
Right away, just by looking at the house, investigators could tell that Navin was being mistreated. He was being locked away in his room and sometimes even in the closet, which again had been padlocked shut. He was being denied food and any items of comfort, including blankets and most of his toys. But once Navin's body was examined, the truth of just how horrendously he had been treated was revealed. It was discovered that 8-year-old Navin was just 30 pounds at the time of his death. That is so far below the 5th percentile for boys around Navin's age. It's 20 pounds less than the average. He was emaciated to the point that you could see his bones sticking through his skin. It was also found that he was absolutely covered in bruises, scars, and lacerations, which were all in various stages of healing, indicating long-term abuse, though they can't tell exactly how long-term because due to how malnourished he was, his body likely took a lot longer to heal his injuries. He also had ligature marks around his wrists that indicated he had been tied up. Blood work done at the hospital determined that he had been consistently malnourished and dehydrated for a prolonged period of time. Then, after reviewing his past medical history, it was found that Navin weighed about 43 pounds in June of 2021. Less than a year later, when he died, he had lost over 10 pounds, which is just not normal for a growing 8-year-old little boy. Records also indicated that Navin had regular doctor visits while under the care of his grandmother, but as we know, he didn't see a doctor at all, not once, when he was with his mother and father. In the end, Navin's cause of death was determined to be murder as a result of long-term abuse and neglect. As Navin's body was being examined, other investigators had confiscated both Stephanie and Brandon's phones for examination. And there, they found even more damning information that told investigators how horrifically they had been treating their son. By the fall of 2021 and early 2022, there were several text messages sent by Jessica to Brandon where she was complaining about Navin. She was irritated that Navin was always hungry and once mentioned that he had gotten urine on the wall and floor. She complained about how difficult he was being and stated multiple times that she was worried she would lose her cool. Other messages talked about how she was punishing Navin by tying him to the banister on the stairs or forcing him to stay in the basement without pillows or blankets for extended periods of time. She also asked Brandon if he could leave Navin downstairs whenever she's sleeping or not home. To this, Brandon replied by saying okay before making a flirty comment. Basically, Jessica and Brandon often spoke about withholding food from Navin, despite him constantly complaining that he was hungry. She also talked about how she could tell that Navin was losing weight and even acknowledged that he should be seen by a doctor, but didn't actually take him. She also talked about how she restrained him multiple times. So it seems like that DCFS call back in February was pretty accurate and they just did a great job of covering their tracks. Either that or the DCFS workers just didn't care. Based on everything I've told you up to this point, just one day after Navin's lifeless body was discovered, both Stephanie and Brandon were arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Months passed as the prosecution continued working on the case, feeling confident that they would get a conviction for both of these sick individuals. But then, almost 2 years after little Navin's death, by December of 2023, his mother, then 37-year-old Stephanie Jones, pleaded guilty to 1 count of first-degree murder. In the deal, the prosecution took a life sentence off the table. Meanwhile, Brandon was maintaining his not guilty plea, which took him to trial also in December of 2023. In this trial, the prosecution outlined everything I've told you up to this point, how the boys were taken away from their parents and placed with their grandmother, then were watched by their parents temporarily, how they refused to give the children back to Laura when she returned, who was the only one who loved and cared for them. They wanted to make Laura's life as difficult as possible when she tried getting the boys back. Meanwhile, they were also dodging DCFS, who did very little to actually check on the boys. They didn't do any surprise visits. They didn't stop by and force them to come out. They didn't do anything other than making these appointments, which gave them plenty of time to clean up the house and, dress Navin in an outfit that made him look a little bit less sickly than he actually was. At their last DCFS visit, they did see that Navin still looked sickly thin, but for some reason, they didn't think that it was enough to warrant them taking the boys away. Again, even though they had no legal right to have the boys in their care to begin with. Due to inaction from DCFS, the boys were left in the care of their parents, who admitted to neglecting and abusing Navin in their texts to one another. And even if they didn't admit it, his body told the whole story. He was likely beaten based on the bruises we saw. He was definitely tied up, and he was left alone for hours at a time in a desolate, lonely, cold room where he was also starved. Police did interview Navin's older brother, who said that his parents actually told them that their grandmother, Laura, had died. They told them awful stories about her and tried to turn them against her, and also made them feel really bad about everything they did. But in the end, the older brother said that his parents are awful, terrible people who treated them horrendously. On the other hand, Brandon's defense claimed that he had no legal responsibility to care for Navin, placing the blame solely on Stephanie for his condition. He said that Navin was typically only under Stephanie's care because he worked long days at his car repair and towing business. He said that he would even sometimes go days at a time without seeing Navin because of how busy he was. Beyond that, though, even though he did know that Navin seemed sick and was losing weight, he didn't get him medical care because he didn't have legal guardianship. In the trial, Brandon took the stand to testify in his own defense. He said that the last time he saw Navin was 2 days before his death. He said that he watched Navin walk up 2 flights of stairs that day before he went to bed. Although I want to mention that the medical experts testified that Navin likely wouldn't have had that much mobility in the days before his death, so he likely wouldn't have been able to climb a full flight of stairs at that point, again due to how malnourished he already was. Brandon testified that since he worked such long hours, he wasn't ever home to feed the kids meals, bathe them, or put them to bed. He never really got a good look at how bad Navin had gotten. He didn't even know that he was being starved.
Have you been present at any time when those contusions or abrasions were put on Navin's body?
There's no way I would have allowed someone to do that.
He also testified the last time he saw Navin alive was almost 2 days before his death, a statement prosecutors challenged during cross-examination.
He asked you the first time, when's the last time you saw Navin? You said yesterday about 3 o'clock.
And if you remember correctly, I corrected myself later on in the interview and I said it was probably the day before.
Accused of denying Navin food and medical care, the state showed Walker photos of his son's declining physical state during the last few months of his life while he lived with his parents.
Does Navin look gaunt? He doesn't look like his face is collapsed in or sunken, right?
No, he looks fine.
He looks fine? How does he look compared to the other two?
Not as good.
What?
Not as good.
Not as good?
That's what I said.
But the prosecution came back and argued that, first of all, it is his duty to protect his son no matter the status of guardianship or how long his hours are. That is still his child. They also talked about how Brandon brought the older child to the ER and for doctor's visits, even though he also didn't have guardianship over him. Doctors and nurses who saw the older brother never even discussed guardianship with Brandon, basically saying that it didn't matter. If Navin needed medical care, he knew very well that he could take him to the doctors even though he didn't have guardianship. So this wasn't an issue of legal guardianship. Brandon just didn't want Navin to get better. He didn't want DCFS to be involved any further to give them an opportunity to take Navin away from them. He wanted to make sure he could continue torturing and starving his son. Again, he knew very well that he could take him to the doctor, but just chose not to. Brandon also tried saying that he was the one that was in contact with DCFS throughout this entire time, showing that he did want to get guardianship and he did want Navin to be cared for. But as you heard earlier, he was the one that was dodging them. He was either the one saying that Laura would never get the boys back, or he was the one saying that they were out of town and that they couldn't come to these appointments. He was the one that was refusing to meet with them. In the end, the prosecution argued that every minute spent not taking Navin to the doctor, not feeding him, and allowing the neglect and abuse to continue was another minute that he was helping Stephanie with the starvation and torture of his 8-year-old son. After 5 days of trial, the jury was sent for deliberations, and after just 45 minutes, they came back with their verdict. 42-year-old Brandon Walker was found guilty of murdering Navin in a, quote, brutal and heinous manner indicative of wanton cruelty. After the verdict came in, came time for sentencing. Like I said, Stephanie had pleaded guilty to her charges, but the state was asking for the max sentence in both their cases. Stephanie's defense team tried saying that she was mentally ill with periods of dissociation which prevented her from caring for Navin. I guess anytime she abused, neglected, or tied him up, she was dissociated. I guess when she texted Brandon about it and lied about it in her police interviews, conveniently enough, she was dissociating that entire time, and then she came back any other time. Before her sentencing, Stephanie read an apology letter to her sons. She said that she experienced mental illness for as long as she could remember. She regretted not seeking help sooner, as if she just noticed Navin's health decline and not as if she was the one that was actively and purposely causing it. After her statement was read, the judge immediately called her out on her BS. He said that he was stunned by the time and effort Stephanie took in starving and torturing Navin. He said that he believed Stephanie to be a bald-faced liar and that the prospects of rehabilitation are pretty much zero. He also felt that she was insincere in her apology, which I completely agree with, since she literally took no accountability for what she really did. In the end, Stephanie Jones was sentenced to 100 years behind bars, which is the maximum allowed under the law. The judge said that if he could have sentenced her to more, he would have. Then at Brandon's sentencing hearing, the judge reiterated that this is the worst case he has ever seen. His voice was often heard quivering throughout the trial, saying that he was also a father and cannot fathom what Brandon has done to his own child. Navin's older brother also spoke at the sentencing, saying that his parents are the worst people he has ever met and that Navin was the best brother he could have asked for. It was the absolute most heart-wrenching part of the entire trial. In the end, the judge gave Brandon a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. Once again, the judge said that he wishes he could have sentenced him to even more. So as of right now, that's where this part of the case sits. I don't really think there was ever a motive discussed, but one thing that sticks out to me is how Stephanie and Brandon always complained about Navin's behaviors, yet they refused to give him back to Laura. They literally could have washed their hands of him and never had to deal with him again if they just gave him back. So to me, I think this was done to torture Navin and Laura. I think they refused to give them back because they hated Laura and they hated Navin. They wanted him to suffer because they wanted to see Navin in pain, but I also think that they wanted to see Laura suffer as well. I think this is a case of two selfish monsters who wanted to make Laura pay for taking their children while also resenting Navin for whatever reason. I think the only reason that he might have had behaviors is because of how poorly he was being treated. Because as far as we know, he was a sweet, loving boy who never caused any problems while properly being cared for by Laura. In the end, I think that Stephanie and Brandon are both sick monsters who are exactly where they belong. I hope every inmate around them knows exactly what they did and treat them accordingly, because neither of them deserve anything more than what they did to their baby boy. And if you thought the case ended there, you'd be wrong. After all of this came out with Navin, after digging into Stephanie's past, they found that yet another one of her children died under suspicious circumstances. On January 5th, 2007, Jessica Jones called 911 to report that she found her baby boy and Navin's half-brother, Nigel Reagan, dead. Upon paramedics' arrival at the home, the baby's father, Justin, said that Stephanie had been sleeping when he came home from work to find that Nigel was lying face down on the couch with his body between two cushions. He was unmoving and unresponsive. He said that when he left for work that day, that is not how he left the baby. He had previously been lying on his back in the middle of the couch, surrounded by blankets so that he could not move. He had no idea how he possibly could have ended up in the position he was found in. Stephanie and Justin went on to say that Nigel had been extra fussy in the 4 days leading to his death, so they gave him some Tylenol and Zantac twice a day. He said that he had also been taken to the hospital several times throughout his life for chronic crying and spitting up. Justin said that Nigel was a difficult baby and that Stephanie was getting increasingly frustrated with him before his death, but maintained that he had never seen her hurt him. Once the baby's body was examined by the medical examiner, his cause of death was ruled as SIDS, or sudden infant death syndrome. Basically, an accidental death that doesn't really have an explanation. But 15 years after the baby's death, and again, after finding out about how Jessica treated her other children, the case was reopened. And after examining the previous Emmy's findings, the toxicology report, and prior police records, the new multi-agency team working the case ruled that Nigel didn't actually die of SIDS, but of asphyxiation, though they can't say exactly how he was asphyxiated. As of right now, they have made a decision not to exhume the baby's body, but they are now planning on doing a reenactment with a baby doll to see if it's even plausible that the baby's death was an accident. Could he have rolled over and ended up in the crevice himself, or did his mother smother him? The new investigative team are working with Justin to answer these questions and have stated that a reenactment will be pivotal to making a determination. As of right now, that's where the case sits with respect to Nigel Reagan. The case was originally investigated almost 20 years ago, and the way they did things then versus now have changed a lot. And given what we know of Stephanie's violent nature, it's safe to say that she may have had something to do with Nigel's death. She was known to be getting frustrated with him, and she was the only one home with him when he died. She also wasn't the one who alerted anyone to his death, even though it seemed like she was at home with him literally all day while Justin was at work. So again, it's absolutely possible that she is responsible for yet another death. The last update I saw on this was from about a year ago, so I don't know what kind of movement has been made since then, if any, but I desperately hope that Justin finds the answers he's looking for, and I hope that if Stephanie is responsible for that baby's death, that she is held accountable for it. But with that being said, that is all I have for today's case, and now I want to hear from you all. Why do you think she killed Navin? Do you agree with me that it was to see both him and Laura suffer? And do you think Brandon is just as responsible as Stephanie is? And do you think Stephanie killed Nigel as well? If so, do you think they'll find the evidence to prove it? Let's discuss this and any other thoughts you have in the comments below. If you like this video, please make sure to go ahead and leave this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I put out new true crime and mystery videos every single week. Don't forget to turn that notification bell too on so you don't miss out on any of my future videos. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Spotify. All will be linked down below. And if you have any case suggestions, please make sure to fill out the Google form, which is also listed down below. With that, I hope you guys have an amazing week. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.